You read the message 3 times before replying, not because you didn't understand it, because something inside you already felt tired. Tired of explaining, tired of fixing the tension, tired of turning every misunderstanding into a courtroom where you had to defend your intentions just to keep the peace. So you stared at the screen for a second longer, then you locked your phone, and somewhere far away from that conversation, your body finally exhaled. Most people ignore moments like that. They answer immediately, smooth things over, keep the emotional machine running. You used to do that too. You thought being a good person meant staying emotionally available, no matter how drained you became. You believed if you just communicated clearly enough, stayed patient enough, loved carefully enough, eventually people would stop twisting your words and start understanding your heart. But some people were never trying to understand you. That realization hurts more than most people admit, especially when you've spent years giving others the kind of grace nobody gave you. And maybe you felt this before, that strange exhaustion after completely normal conversations, the way certain people could ruin your entire evening with one passive-aggressive comment. The replaying. The overthinking. Sitting in your car afterward, going over every sentence, wondering why you suddenly felt so small. Nothing bad technically happened. Still, your peace disappeared. That part matters more than it seems, because people who need emotional control rarely announce themselves loudly. They show up through pressure, confusion, tiny provocations, conversations that somehow leave you carrying emotions that were never yours to begin with. And for a long time, you probably thought the solution was better communication. It wasn't. The real shift begins the moment you stop treating every misunderstanding like an emergency. That's when the power dynamic quietly changes. Not dramatically, not overnight, but people notice. The ones who relied on your reactions notice first. Today, we're going deeper into the psychology of silence. Why certain people become deeply unsettled when you stop reacting emotionally. Why over-explaining quietly destroys your peace, and how emotional detachment, real emotional detachment, has less to do with becoming cold and more to do with finally protecting yourself from emotional chaos that was never yours to carry in the first place. Because once you understand what silence actually does to manipulative dynamics, you stop fearing it, you start using it carefully. A lot of emotionally aware people carry the same hidden belief for years without realizing it. If I can just explain myself clearly enough, this will finally get better. So they keep trying. Long paragraphs, carefully worded conversations, late-night messages rewritten 6 different times before sending, mentally rehearsing arguments in the shower, thinking, maybe I said it wrong. But some conversations were never built for resolution. That's the painful part. You think you're trying to create understanding while the other person is quietly studying your reactions instead. And it takes people a long time to notice this, especially kind people. Especially people who grew up believing peace was something they had to earn by staying emotionally manageable. A woman once described this perfectly. She said every disagreement in her relationship somehow ended the same way. She would begin by expressing something simple, hurt, disappointment, confusion, and 20 minutes later she was apologizing for her tone instead of talking about the actual issue. That pattern slowly broke her confidence. Not instantly, slowly. That's how emotional manipulation usually works. Not through obvious cruelty, through erosion, tiny distortions repeated often enough that you start distrusting your own emotional reality. And honestly, part of you probably already knew this. You knew certain people misunderstood you too consistently for it to be accidental. You noticed how they ignored clarity but reacted strongly to emotion. You noticed how calm explanations somehow turned into longer, more exhausting conversations. Still, part of you kept trying. Part of you still wanted the relationship to feel safe again. That contradiction is deeply human. People don't let go the moment they recognize something unhealthy. Sometimes they stay far longer than they should, hoping the version they first met will come back. Usually, it doesn't. And one of the hardest realizations during healing is understanding that your empathy can be used against you when it lacks boundaries. Not your kindness, not your heart, your access. How many unsent texts are sitting in your drafts right now? Seriously, how many times have you explained yourself to someone who already decided who you were before the conversation even started? You've probably felt that helplessness before, trying to clear things up with someone who seems strangely committed to misunderstanding you. That feeling drains people more than they realize, not only emotionally, physically. You start carrying conversations in your body, tight chest, heavy stomach, restless sleep, checking your phone the second you wake up wondering if they replied. And then one day, something small shifts. You get tired, not angry, not dramatic, just tired. Tired of defending your intentions to people who benefit from your self-doubt. Tired of explaining your humanity to people who only listen long enough to find your emotional weak spots. That silence afterward feels strange at first. You type the message, delete it, type it again, then stop. No reply, and weirdly enough, that moment says more than another paragraph ever could. Because some people don't need more explanation from you. They need less access to you. That's where emotional detachment actually begins, not in coldness, not in revenge, in exhaustion. The quiet kind. The kind that finally realizes peace should not require constant self-defense. Some people don't feel connected to you unless they can affect your emotional state. That's the part most people miss. They think the conflict is about communication, about misunderstandings, about working things out. Meanwhile, the other person is watching one thing almost the entire time. Can they still reach you emotionally? Can they still pull you into guilt? Can they still make you explain yourself? Can they still interrupt your peace with one sentence? If the answer is yes, the cycle usually continues. A guy once described this in a way that was painfully accurate. He said there was someone at work who constantly made little comments around other people. Nothing direct enough to call out immediately. Just small things. Relax, I'm joking. You're too sensitive. That's not what I meant. So he kept letting it slide. But every time he drove home afterward, he replayed the conversations in his head the entire ride back. Music off. Hands tight on the steering wheel. Thinking about comebacks hours too late. And that's when he realized something uncomfortable. The other person wasn't taking his energy during the conversation. They were taking it afterward. That changes how you see these dynamics. Some people don't need screaming matches to control your emotional state. A raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, a strategically timed silence. Sometimes that's enough to occupy your mind for the rest of the night. You probably experienced this yourself. A completely normal day suddenly ruined by one interaction. One text, one comment, one look. And suddenly your entire nervous system shifts around someone else's mood. That's not connection, that's emotional access. And once people realize they can consistently disturb your inner state, they often keep testing it, not always consciously, not always maliciously. Some people are simply deeply disconnected from themselves, so they regulate internally by creating movement in others. Chaos becomes familiar to them. Stillness feels threatening, which explains why certain people become strangely uncomfortable when you stop reacting the way you used to. No long explanation, no emotional spiral, no immediate defense, just calmness. For a second, they don't know what to do with that, and honestly, neither do you at first. Silence feels unnatural when you spent years over-explaining just to keep relationships stable. Part of you still wants to smooth things over, to fix the tension quickly, to make sure nobody sees you as cold or difficult. That urge doesn't disappear overnight. But then you start noticing something. The moment you stop feeding certain dynamics emotionally, people reveal themselves faster. The concern becomes irritation. The patience disappears. The hidden entitlement surfaces. And sometimes it happens over something incredibly small. A delayed reply, a boundary, a simple, "I'm not available tonight." That's all it takes. You would be shocked how many relationships were quietly built around your emotional over-availability. Most people never notice this until they begin protecting their peace. Then suddenly everyone has a problem with the new version of them. That part can feel lonely. You start wondering, am I becoming selfish? Am I shutting people out? Why does protecting my energy feel so uncomfortable? But discomfort doesn't always mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're breaking a pattern your body became emotionally addicted to. That distinction matters a lot. And once you begin seeing how much emotional chaos relied on your participation, you stop responding automatically. You pause instead, and that pause changes more than people realize. The pause looks small from the outside. Most people don't even notice it happening. But internally, it changes the entire interaction. You get the message. You feel the emotional pull immediately. The urge to explain, defend, fix the tension before it grows. Your fingers even hover over the keyboard for a second. Then, nothing. You put the phone down. Walk into the kitchen. Pour water slowly. Try to settle the feeling in your chest before saying something you'll regret 2 hours later. That moment matters more than people think. For years, you may have believed strength meant having the perfect response ready instantly. The perfect comeback, the perfect explanation, the perfect emotional control. But real self-control often looks quieter than that. It looks like interruption. Interrupting the automatic reaction. Interrupting the automatic reaction. Interrupting the emotional spiral before it fully takes over. Interrupting the version of yourself that used to abandon its own peace just to keep other people comfortable. Most people never develop that skill. They react first, reflect later. That's why so many conversations leave people emotionally wrecked afterward. They speak from the wound, then spend the next 6 hours replaying everything in their head trying to repair the damage emotionally. You've probably done that before too. Most people have. And honestly, part of what makes silence difficult is that it forces you to sit with your own discomfort first. No immediate emotional release, no instant reassurance, no quick resolution, just tension. For a little while, your mind panics inside that silence. What if they're angry? What if I lose the relationship? What if they think I don't care? That internal noise gets loud, especially if you were conditioned to associate emotional availability with love. But then something strange starts happening the longer you practice the pause. You begin seeing things you couldn't see while reacting. The manipulation hidden inside the urgency, the guilt hidden inside concern, the subtle pressure beneath certain conversations. People reveal themselves differently when they can't emotionally rush you anymore. A woman once described a moment that changed her entire perspective. She said her mother called during dinner and immediately started criticizing her life choices the way she always had. Normally, she would defend herself instantly, explain, over-justify, leave the conversation emotionally shaking afterward. This time, she just listened quietly, not passive-aggressively, not emotionally detached in a cruel way, just calm. And eventually, her mother became visibly frustrated by the lack of emotional reaction. That silence exposed something painful. The conversation had never really been about understanding. It was about control. You don't fully understand the power of stillness until you watch someone become unsettled by your refusal to emotionally collapse. That realization stays with people because silence becomes a mirror, not the cold, silent treatment people use to punish others. Something deeper, a mirror that forces people to sit with their own behavior without your emotional reactions distracting from it. And honestly, some people cannot tolerate that mirror for very long. That's why they push harder, why they escalate, why they suddenly accuse you of being distant, different, selfish, cold. Your calmness disrupts the version of reality where they had constant access to your emotions, and for a while that shift feels uncomfortable for everyone involved, including you. Part of you still misses the old pattern sometimes, even when the old pattern was hurting you. That's the contradiction nobody talks about enough. Healing doesn't always feel empowering in the moment. Sometimes it just feels unfamiliar, quiet, awkward, a little lonely. But the pause keeps teaching you something important every single time you use it. Not every emotion deserves immediate expression. Not every misunderstanding deserves pursuit. Not every conflict deserves access to your peace. Some things reveal themselves only after you stop reacting long enough to actually see them clearly. And once you see them clearly, you stop needing other people to tell you what's real. One of the most exhausting ways to live is constantly needing other people to confirm your reality before you trust yourself. You notice something feels off, but wait for proof. You feel hurt, but immediately question whether you're too sensitive. You sense disrespect, then spend the next hour explaining it away in your own head. That habit drains people quietly, not all at once, little by little. And if you've spent years around emotionally confusing dynamics, you probably know exactly what this feels like. The second tension appears, your focus shifts away from your own feelings and toward managing the other person's perception of you. How do I make them understand? How do I explain this better? How do I avoid sounding difficult? You stop listening inward, you start performing outward. That split creates exhaustion most people don't even have language for. A man once said he realized this after a conversation with his brother. The entire discussion left him feeling strangely guilty, even though deep down he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. So later that night, he sat in his car outside his apartment for almost 20 minutes, replaying every sentence, trying to figure out where he messed up. Then a strange thought hit him. Why was he automatically assuming his feelings needed a defense attorney? That question stayed with him. Maybe it stays with you too. Some people become so accustomed to emotional invalidation that they no longer trust their own reactions without external permission first. And once that happens, almost anyone with enough confidence can start shaping your reality for you. That's dangerous, not dramatically dangerous, quietly dangerous. You start abandoning your instincts in real time just to preserve connection. And honestly, part of you usually knows it's happening while it's happening. You feel yourself shrinking during certain conversations, laughing at things that actually hurt, pretending something doesn't bother you, so the room stays comfortable. Then later, you sit alone with this heavy feeling in your chest, wondering why you feel invisible around people who claim to love you. That loneliness is difficult to explain, especially when you're surrounded by people and still feel emotionally unseen. But eventually something changes, not because you become harder, not because you stop caring. You just get tired of betraying yourself internally every time tension enters the room. That fatigue becomes clarity. And clarity changes the way you move. You stop over-explaining boundaries. You stop arguing endlessly with people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop treating your own discomfort like weak evidence in a courtroom built around someone else's emotions. A small example of this looks almost boring from the outside. Someone says something disrespectful. You notice it immediately. The old version of you would spend hours trying to decide whether you were allowed to feel hurt by it. Now, you just notice the feeling, quietly, honestly. And that alone changes your entire life more than most people realize. No dramatic confrontation, no performance, just self-trust. That's the part people underestimate. You don't heal only by learning how to identify unhealthy behavior. You heal by learning to stop abandoning your own perception. Every time someone challenges it, there's a difference. And once you begin trusting yourself again, certain relationships start looking very different very quickly. You notice who only felt comfortable around the version of you that constantly doubted itself, who benefited from your confusion, who relied on your endless empathy to avoid accountability. That realization can feel heartbreaking. Sometimes the people you worked hardest to keep peace with were the people least interested in your peace to begin with. And then, there's a moment, a quiet one. You stop explaining, stop chasing understanding, stop trying to emotionally win conversations that only leave you emptier afterward. You just sit there calmly. And the strange thing is, that silence often tells you everything you needed to know. Something strange happens when you stop feeding chaos with your attention. At first, nothing. At least that's how it looks. You expect immediate peace, immediate clarity, maybe even relief. Instead, things sometimes get louder before they get quiet. The texts become more frequent. The passive-aggressive comments sharpen. People who barely noticed your existence before suddenly seem deeply concerned about your attitude. That shift confuses a lot of people. They think, maybe I'm handling this wrong. Maybe I really am becoming cold. But unhealthy dynamics often react aggressively when they stop receiving emotional access. That reaction says more than people realize. A woman once described finally setting a boundary with someone she had spent years emotionally over-accommodating. Nothing dramatic. She simply stopped responding immediately every single time they demanded her attention. That was it. No fight, no speech, no emotional scene. And suddenly the other person started unraveling. Long messages, guilt, subtle accusations, strange emotional pressure disguised as concern. For a second, she almost gave in. Part of her missed the old closeness, even though that closeness constantly exhausted her. That contradiction matters. People can miss what hurt them, especially when chaos became emotionally familiar. Healing doesn't erase attachment overnight, but somewhere inside that discomfort, she noticed something she had ignored for years. The relationship only felt stable when she abandoned herself to maintain it. Once she stopped over-functioning emotionally, the dynamic couldn't hold itself together anymore. That realization changes people. You begin seeing how many relationships quietly depended on your emotional labor to survive. Your calming, your explaining, your constant willingness to absorb tension so nobody else had to sit in discomfort for too long. And honestly, some people became very comfortable with that version of you. The version that always reached back first, always repaired things, always carried the emotional weight. Then, one day, you stopped. No dramatic announcement, no revenge. You just got tired. Tired enough to choose peace instead of emotional survival. And weirdly enough, that's when certain people finally revealed who they were underneath the performance. The patience disappeared. The kindness became conditional. The misunderstanding suddenly turned into hostility the moment your reactions became unavailable. You probably witnessed this before. Someone who claimed you were too emotional, becoming incredibly emotional the second you emotionally detached from them. That irony is hard to ignore once you see it clearly. And silence exposes these contradictions fast. Not through force, through absence. Without your reactions distracting from the situation, people eventually confront themselves. Some grow, some reflect, some quietly fade away. Others escalate. That part can feel unsettling, especially if you still carry old conditioning around, keeping everyone comfortable. Watching people become frustrated by your boundaries can trigger guilt, even when you know deep down you're finally protecting yourself. So for a while you sit in this strange emotional middle ground, relieved but grieving, peaceful but lonely, more stable, yet still missing certain people you know were unhealthy for you. Nobody talks enough about that stage. The grief of outgrowing emotional chaos is still grief, even when it's necessary. And then one day you notice something subtle. Your body feels lighter. You stop replaying conversations all night. You stop waking up anxious over unresolved tension. Your evenings become quieter. Your thoughts become clearer. You sit with coffee in complete silence and realize you're not constantly emotionally bracing anymore. That feeling is priceless, because eventually the chaos collapses without your participation. Not always loudly, sometimes quietly. People simply lose access to the version of you they once controlled through guilt, urgency, confusion, or emotional pressure. And once that access disappears, your peace starts returning in pieces you didn't even realize you lost. A lot of people hear conversations like this and assume emotional detachment means becoming numb. It doesn't. You still care. You still feel things deeply. Certain words still sting sometimes. The difference is you stop handing people unrestricted access to your inner world. That takes practice, real practice. Not motivational quotes. Not pretending nothing affects you. Most emotionally aware people still feel the pull to explain themselves sometimes. They still have moments where they almost send the paragraph, almost reopen the conversation, almost chase closure from people who were never truly offering it. You probably know that feeling. Standing in the kitchen at midnight, rereading old messages even though part of you already knows reopening the wound won't change the ending. And then you put the phone down. That small moment matters. Healing is often quieter than people expect. So let's make this practical. The first step is learning to pause before responding emotionally. Not forever, just long enough to hear yourself again. When something triggers you, notice the urgency first, the need to react immediately, the pressure to fix the discomfort right now. Most people obey that urgency automatically. Instead, interrupt it. Walk outside for a minute, wash your face, sit in silence for 10 minutes before replying. You'd be surprised how many emotional reactions dissolve once your body settles. The second step is identifying the real wound underneath the reaction. This part gets uncomfortable. Sometimes the situation hurts less than what it reminds you of. Rejection, feeling invisible, feeling misunderstood, feeling easy to replace. Old pain attaches itself to present moments faster than most people realize. That's why some conversations feel emotionally massive, even when they seem small on the surface. Your reaction isn't only about now. Part of it is historical. Understanding that creates compassion for yourself, not excuses. Awareness. The third step is delaying emotional access. This changes relationships immediately. You do not owe everyone instant access to your energy simply because they demand it. And honestly, people who become angry when you take time to process your emotions usually benefited from your lack of boundaries before. That realization stings a little. Still true. A delayed response is not cruelty. A boundary is not rejection. Needing space does not make you emotionally unavailable. Sometimes it means you're finally becoming emotionally responsible. Then comes the hardest part for many people, responding without emotional leakage. No hidden resentment. No essay disguised as clarity. No over-explaining trying to force understanding. Just honesty. Short, clean, grounded. I'm not available for this conversation right now. That didn't sit right with me. I need some space. No. Simple words become powerful when they stop carrying panic underneath them. And honestly, that takes time. People who spent years emotionally over-functioning often feel guilty the first few times they communicate calmly without over-justifying themselves. Your body almost expects punishment afterward. That's how deeply some patterns get wired. The final step is returning to yourself after difficult interactions instead of mentally living inside them for the next 12 hours. This part changes lives quietly. Go for a walk. Turn the music off for a minute. Cook something slowly. Journal honestly. Sit with the discomfort without immediately trying to escape it through distraction. Little by little, your mind stops revolving around people who drain it. You come back to yourself. That's the real goal. Not becoming untouchable, not winning emotional battles, just no longer abandoning your own peace every time someone else becomes chaotic. And eventually, you notice something beautiful. The silence that once felt lonely starts feeling safe. Maybe the strangest part of healing is realizing how much energy you spent trying to prevent other people from misunderstanding you. Years of it. Explaining your intentions, softening your boundaries, rehearsing conversations in your head before they even happened, trying to appear calm enough, kind enough, emotionally reasonable enough to avoid conflict. And honestly, part of you probably thought that was maturity, until your body started paying the price for it. The exhaustion, the anxiety before certain conversations, the emotional heaviness that followed completely ordinary interactions. That feeling of needing 2 hours alone just to feel like yourself again. You weren't imagining that. Your body keeps score long before your mind fully accepts what's happening. That realization hits differently once you start reconnecting with your peace. Not performative peace, not positive mindset peace, real peace. The kind where your chest no longer tightens every time your phone lights up. The kind where silence stops feeling like rejection. The kind where you no longer spend entire nights mentally arguing with people who already decided not to understand you. That kind of peace changes a person quietly. You start speaking slower, listening more carefully, protecting your energy without announcing it to everyone. And maybe the biggest shift of all, you stop chasing emotional closure from people who only gave you emotional confusion. That one takes time, sometimes longer than people admit. There are moments during healing where you still miss people who drained you. You miss the attention, the familiarity, the version of connection you hoped was real. Then you remember how your body felt around them. That heavy feeling afterward, the overthinking, the constant emotional tension disguised as love or friendship or concern, and suddenly the loneliness doesn't feel quite as frightening anymore. A lot of people return to unhealthy dynamics simply because the silence feels unfamiliar at first. Chaos was predictable. Peace wasn't. You probably felt that contradiction inside yourself too. Part of you wanting freedom, another part still reaching backward toward what hurt you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But eventually there comes a moment where your self-respect grows stronger than your fear of disappointing people. That moment changes everything quietly. You stop trying to save relationships that only survive through your self-abandonment. You stop explaining boundaries to people committed to crossing them anyway. You stop shrinking yourself just to remain emotionally digestible for others. And the strange thing is, your world becomes calmer almost immediately afterward. Not perfect, just calmer. You sit alone with coffee in the morning and realize your thoughts are no longer racing. You walk through a grocery store without carrying yesterday's conversations in your chest. You spend an evening by yourself and don't immediately panic from the silence anymore. That's healing, not becoming emotionless. Becoming safe for yourself again. And once you experience that kind of inner stability, even briefly, it becomes very difficult to tolerate relationships built entirely around emotional chaos. You start choosing differently. Not from bitterness, not from superiority, just from awareness. You finally understand that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's survival. And honestly, some people will never understand the version of you that stopped over-explaining. That's okay. They were connected to the version of you that kept abandoning itself to keep them comfortable. This version is different, quieter, clearer, harder to manipulate. Not because you stopped caring, because you finally started caring about yourself too. If this video felt strangely personal, if parts of it sounded uncomfortably familiar, that probably means you've been carrying emotional exhaustion for longer than you realized. And maybe this is the first time someone actually put words to it, not the loud version people post online, the quieter version, the overthinking, the replaying conversations, the exhaustion after interactions that shouldn't have affected you so deeply. A lot of people live like that for years. You don't have to anymore. So if you're at the point in your life where peace matters more than proving yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, stay here. This community is full of people learning how to stop abandoning themselves just to maintain connection. Comment below. I stopped explaining everything, not for motivation, for awareness. A reminder to yourself that your peace does not need to be negotiated every time someone refuses to understand your boundaries. And if you want practical help with this process, the Boundary Scripts and Silence Prompts guide is in the description below. Simple responses, clear boundaries, real-life tools for moments where your emotions want to over-explain again. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, but protect your peace carefully. Some versions of you suffered very hard just to find it. God bless you.